Get him off my plane. Ex-soldier daughter protects CEO dad from racist attack and hidden assassin. The morning fog at Los Angeles International Airport carried the kind of thick, oppressive weight that reminded Sarah Mitchell of Kandahar province at dawn. She stood at gate 42B, her trained eyes sweeping across every face in the crowded terminal with the methodical precision that 4 tours in Afghanistan had burned into her muscle memory. 28 years old, 5'8" of coiled readiness, hidden beneath a deliberately unremarkable navy blazer and dark jeans, Sarah looked like any other young professional catching the red-eye to New York. No one would guess that the laptop bag slung over her shoulder contained encrypted communications equipment worth more than most people's cars, or that the diabetic insulin pen in her pocket was actually a military-grade paralytic agent, or that she could kill a man 17 different ways with just the items available at an airport Starbucks. They certainly wouldn't guess that she was about to undertake the most dangerous mission of her life, not in some foreign combat zone, but in the first-class cabin of Pacific Airways Flight 892. 6 feet away, leaning against a pillar, while pretending to read the Wall Street Journal, stood her father. Darius Mitchell, 52 years old, wore his old UCLA hoodie like armor against recognition. The faded blue fabric hung loose on his athletic frame, the Golden Bear logo barely visible after years of washing. His appearance was carefully calculated to look unremarkable, even slightly shabby. It was a disguise that would cost several people dearly before this flight touched down in New York. Sarah's earpiece crackled softly. "Phoenix, this is base. Package confirmed at your 20. Multiple unknowns in vicinity. Maintain Overwatch protocol." She touched her collar, activating the subdermal microphone implanted just beneath her jaw. "Copy base. Phoenix has eyes on package. Reading 5. No 6 possibles in immediate vicinity." Elena Rodriguez's voice came through clear, despite being transmitted from Pacific Airways' newly established security center 3,000 miles away. "Confirmed threats. Negative, but my gut says something's off." Sarah's instincts, honed by dozens of combat missions where the difference between life and death was measured in milliseconds, were screaming. She'd learned to trust that feeling in Afghanistan when it had saved her squad from an IED that would have killed them all. The commendation that followed had cited her extraordinary battlefield intuition, but Sarah knew it was simpler than that when death was hunting. The air itself changed. And right now, the air around Gate 42B tasted like a killing field. Darius Mitchell had no idea his daughter was shadowing him. As far as he knew, Sarah was in Washington, D.C. consulting with the Pentagon on improving military-to-civilian transition programs. She'd told him about the fictional meeting 3 days ago, just hours after he'd confided his plan to fly incognito on his own airline. The timing wasn't coincidental. Sarah had spent the intervening 72 hours coordinating with Elena to establish a ghost protocol, a security operation so secret that only 3 people in the entire company knew about it. The public story was simple. Darius Mitchell, the billionaire who'd made his fortune in defense contracting before pivoting to humanitarian technology, had quietly purchased Pacific Airways 6 days ago. The acquisition had been structured through so many shell companies and offshore entities that even most of the board didn't know who their new owner really was. The official announcement would come next week, accompanied by the kind of carefully orchestrated media campaign that turned corporate acquisitions into cultural moments. But Darius had insisted on this flight first. "I need to see it through a passenger's eyes," he told Elena, "especially a passenger who looks like me." What he hadn't told anyone except Sarah in a moment of vulnerability 3 weeks ago was the real reason he'd bought the airline. His niece Keisha, a brilliant young computer scientist with a master's degree from Stanford, had been forcibly removed from a Pacific Airways flight just last month. Her crime making a white passenger uncomfortable by sitting in the first-class seat she'd purchased with her own money. The video of her being escorted off the plane in tears had gone viral for exactly 36 hours before being buried under the next scandal, the next outrage, the next injustice. But Darius hadn't forgotten, and now he owned the whole damn airline. Sarah watched her father move toward the boarding line, noting how his shoulders tensed slightly when a TSA officer did a double take. Even now, even with all his success, Darius Mitchell still braced for the extra scrutiny, the additional questions, the random checks that were anything but random. It made Sarah's blood burn with a familiar rage, the same feeling she'd had when her commanding officer in Afghanistan had tried to credit her tactical brilliance to the white lieutenant who'd been too frozen with fear to even relay her orders. Priority boarding for Pacific Airways Flight 892 to New York JFK, the gate agent announced. We welcome our first-class passengers and elite members. Sarah held back, letting several passengers board before her. Her seat 3A had been strategically selected, close enough to her father's 2A to intervene if necessary, but not so close as to be obvious. She'd run 17 different scenario models with Elena calculating angles of attack, escape routes, defensive positions. In a metal tube at 38,000 feet, every inch mattered. Behind Darius in line stood Victoria Sterling, and Sarah's tactical assessment immediately categorized her as a potential problem. 48 years old, approximately 5'6", 130 pounds, wearing enough designer labels to fund a small military operation. The woman's body language screamed entitlement, from the way she held her latest model iPhone like a scepter to the dismissive glance she cast at everyone around her. Sarah had seen her type before, usually in the officers' wives, who thought their husbands' ranks extended to them. But it was Victoria's eyes that concerned Sarah most. They tracked to Darius, repeatedly narrowing with each assessment. The calculation was obvious: expensive clothes plus dark skin equals suspicion. Sarah had seen that equation computed thousands of times, but it never got easier to witness. Excuse me, Victoria's voice cut through the boarding area like a scalpel through silk. I think there might be some confusion. This is the priority boarding line. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward her concealed tactical knife before she caught herself. Not yet. The mission parameters were clear: observe and protect, but do not intervene unless absolutely necessary. Darius wanted to experience this authentically. Sarah had to let it play out, even as every protective instinct screamed at her to shut it down. Good morning, Darius replied with practiced calm. No confusion, but thank you for your concern. Sarah could see the micro-expressions flashing across her father's face, visible only to someone who'd spent a lifetime learning to read him. The tightening around his eyes that meant he was suppressing anger. The slight forward tilt of his chin that he'd taught her meant never show weakness to a bully. Yusumi. The controlled breathing pattern he'd learned from the same meditation teacher who'd helped Sarah process her PTSD. Victoria Sterling wasn't done. Her voice rose slightly, ensuring others would hear. It's just that general boarding hasn't been called yet. The signs can be confusing, especially if English isn't your first language. The insult was so precisely delivered that Sarah almost admired the craft. In a single sentence, Victoria had questioned Darius's economic status, his intelligence, and his nationality. It was a masterclass in coded racism, the kind that gave just enough plausible deniability to avoid consequences. But Victoria Sterling had no idea she'd just made herself a target in a much larger war. Sarah's earpiece buzzed. Phoenix, we have a problem. Facial recognition just pinged on a passenger. Mason Brooks, former Delta Force, dishonorably discharged 3 years ago, currently listed as a security contractor for Apex International. Sarah's blood went cold. Apex International was a corporate mercenary firm, the kind that specialized in hostile takeovers that went far beyond boardroom battles. If Mason Brooks was on this flight, it wasn't coincidence. Location, she subvocalized, her lips barely moving. Just cleared security. Moving toward your gate now. Phoenix Brooks is Tier 1 capable. Weapons specialist, close quarters, combat expert. If he's here for the package, he won't get close enough, Sarah cut in. Alert base command. Go to condition yellow. She scanned the boarding area again, this time with new urgency. Mason Brooks. She knew the name from military intelligence briefings. The man had been Delta Force's most lethal operator until he'd gone rogue, selling his skills to the highest bidder. His file contained a list of confirmed kills that read like a roster of political dissidents and corporate whistleblowers. If someone had hired him to take out Darius, it meant the acquisition had attracted the wrong kind of attention. The gate agent, a young woman named Jessica Chen, called Darius forward. Sarah watched her father present his mobile boarding pass with the same quiet dignity he'd taught her to maintain in the face of disrespect. Jessica scanned it with a warm smile that faltered when she noticed Victoria practically breathing down Darius's neck. Welcome aboard, Mr. Mitchell, Jessica said. Seat 2A, you'll be on your left as you board. Enjoy your flight to New York. Victoria surged forward before Darius could move. Excuse me, miss. I think you should scan his pass again. These electronic systems can be so unreliable, and we certainly want to ensure everyone's safety. Sarah's tactical mind evaluated 17 different ways to neutralize Victoria Sterling in less than 3 seconds. The woman's proximity to Darius, combined with the incoming threat of Mason Brooks, was creating a dangerous tactical situation. But the mission parameters remained unchanged. Watch, protect, do not engage unless necessary. An elderly couple had joined the line behind Victoria. Sarah's trained eye immediately assessed them as non-threats. The man moved with the deliberate care of someone with arthritis, the woman supporting him with practiced ease. They exchanged glances that spoke of decades of marriage, and from their expressions, disapproval of Victoria's behavior. "Young lady," the elderly man said to Jessica with quiet authority, "you've done your job perfectly. This passenger has been properly verified. I witnessed the entire exchange." Sarah made a mental note to run background checks on the couple later. In her experience, people who stood up to bullies either had nothing to lose or everything to fight for. As the boarding process continued, Sarah's earpiece crackled again. "Phoenix Brooks just entered visual range, approaching your 6 o'clock, approximately 50 meters, and closing." She turned casually, pulling out her phone as if checking messages, using the screen's reflection to survey behind her. There he was. Mason Brooks moved through the crowd like a shark through water, his gait smooth and predatory. 6'2", probably 220 pounds of trained muscle. He wore casual closed jeans and a Portland Trail Blazers jersey, but Sarah could see the tells. The way his eyes swept the crowd in overlapping sectors, the slight bulge at his ankle that suggested a ceramic knife, the only blade that could pass through security. The careful distance he maintained from other passengers, always leaving himself room to move. Their eyes met in the phone's reflection for a split second. Recognition flared in Brooks' gaze, followed immediately by calculation. He knew who she was. Sarah Mitchell, the woman who'd earned a Purple Heart after single-handedly defending a forward operating base from a Taliban assault, killing 13 attackers with nothing but her sidearm and a commandeered RPG. The only soldier in her unit who'd survived an ambush that had been specifically designed to kill her after she disrupted too many opium shipments. Brooks smiled slightly and nodded a professional, acknowledging another professional. Then he boarded the plane. Sarah's mind raced through tactical scenarios. Brooks was now on the aircraft with her father. He'd clearly made her as security, which meant he'd adjust his approach. But he'd also boarded, which meant he was confident in his ability to complete whatever mission he'd been hired for despite her presence. "Base Brooks is on board. We need to abort." "Negative, Phoenix. Package insists on proceeding. Captain Williams has been briefed on potential security situation. Proceed with original mission parameters." Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew it would be pointless. Her father had inherited the Mitchell family's stubborn streak, the same one that had driven her to become the youngest female Ranger School graduate in history, despite being told repeatedly that women didn't belong in combat arms. Once Darius set his mind to something, mountains moved or Mitchells died trying. She boarded the plane, her senses hyper-alert. The first-class cabin smelled of leather and expensive perfume mixed with the underlying chemical scent of recycled air. 12 seats arranged in 3 rows each, a small pod of privilege. Her father was already seated in 2A, pulling out his laptop with the casual ease of someone who had no idea an assassin had just boarded the same aircraft. Victoria Sterling took her seat in 2C, making a production of sanitizing her space with antibacterial wipes while shooting pointed looks at Darius. The elderly couple settled into row 3, and Mason Brooks. Sarah's breath caught. Brooks took seat 1A directly in front of her father. The position would give him easy access while making it difficult for Sarah to intervene without crossing the entire aisle. The chief flight attendant approached with practiced grace. Maria Santos, according to Sarah's pre-flight intelligence briefing. 20-year veteran, spotless record, married with 3 kids. Sarah had reviewed the entire crew roster, looking for potential threats or assets. Maria's file had stood out for the number of commendations she'd received for handling difficult situations with grace and professionalism. "Good morning, folks. Welcome aboard. Can I start you with something to drink before we push back?" Victoria immediately demanded champagne, then pulled Maria aside for a whispered conversation that Sarah could hear perfectly thanks to the acoustic enhancers built into her supposed hearing aids. I'm not entirely comfortable with the seating arrangement. The gentleman in 2A was behaving suspiciously at the gate, and there seemed to be some confusion about his documentation. Perhaps there's been some sort of mix-up with the seat assignments. Sarah watched Maria's expression remain professionally neutral, even as her eyes tightened with frustration. Another racist passenger making another racist complaint. If only she knew that the man she was trying to have removed owned every seat on this aircraft, including the one her prejudiced ass was sitting in. More passengers filed into first class. Christopher Brennan, 35, radiating the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never being told no. His Brooks Brothers suit cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his Princeton class ring might as well have been a flashing neon sign advertising his privilege. He immediately picked up on Victoria's distress, his eyes tracking to Darius with the same dismissive assessment. Sarah's tactical computer of a brain assigned him a threat level moderate. Not because he posed any physical danger, but because mob mentality could escalate situations unpredictably. If Brooks made his move during a moment of social chaos, "Everything okay here?" Christopher asked Victoria, his tone suggesting a fraternity brother ready to back up another member of the club. "There seems to be some confusion about the passenger manifest," Victoria replied, her voice carrying just enough to ensure others heard. "This gentleman may be in the wrong cabin." Christopher turned to address Darius directly, his tone dripping with condescension. "Hey, buddy, you sure you're in the right seat? Sometimes those boarding passes can be confusing." Sarah's hand drifted to her tactical pen, a gift from her old squad leader. It looked like an expensive Mont Blanc, but the reinforced titanium body could punch through a skull if necessary. She forced herself to remain still, even as every instinct screamed at her to intervene. Darius looked up from his laptop, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp with intelligence. "I'm quite certain, thank you, but I appreciate everyone's sudden concern for my literacy and navigation skills. It's touching, really." The sarcasm was subtle but effective. Christopher's face flushed, and Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Her father had learned that particular verbal judo from her mother, a woman who could destroy someone with words so precisely that they'd thank her for it. Then Captain Robert Williams emerged from the cockpit, and Sarah's tension decreased by exactly 1 degree. Bobby Williams was on their side, one of the few people who knew Darius's true identity. Former Air Force decorated pilot, and most importantly, a man who owed Darius his career after Darius had recommended him to Pacific Airways when he was struggling to transition from military to commercial aviation. The recognition in Williams' eyes when he saw Darius was genuine surprise mixed with understanding. He played his part perfectly, greeting Darius as an old friend while establishing his credentials in a way that made Victoria and Christopher visibly uncomfortable. But Sarah's attention was split between the social drama and Mason Brooks, who hadn't moved or reacted to any of the commotion. He sat reading an in-flight magazine with apparent fascination, but Sarah could see the micro-movements of his eyes, tracking every person in the cabin. He was mapping the space, calculating angles, identifying threats and obstacles. The same thing she was doing. When Captain Williams revealed Darius's identity as the new owner of Pacific Airways, the cabin erupted in shocked silence. Victoria's phone slipped from her fingers. Christopher's mouth fell open. The elderly couple nodded with satisfaction. And Mason Brooks didn't react at all. That worried Sarah more than anything else. A professional would have been surprised by the revelation, even if just for show. Brooks's complete lack of reaction meant he already knew exactly who Darius Mitchell was, which meant this wasn't a case of mistaken identity or corporate espionage gone wrong. Someone had specifically hired Mason Brooks to kill the new owner of Pacific Airways, and they'd sent him anyway, knowing Sarah would be there. As her father stood to address the shocked first-class passengers, Sarah's earpiece crackled with Elena's urgent voice. "Phoenix, we just intercepted communications. Apex International has a $10 million contract on the package. Authorized 48 hours ago, right after the acquisition papers were filed. Someone on the board leaked the information." Sarah's blood ran cold. A board member had betrayed them, and Mason Brooks was here to collect $10 million for her father's death. At 38,000 feet in a metal tube with nowhere to run, she was the only thing standing between the world's deadliest assassin and the man who'd taught her to tie her shoes. The plane began to taxi toward the runway as her father delivered a speech about dignity equality, and corporate responsibility. Victoria Sterling sat in stunned silence, her world collapsing with every word. Christopher Brennan tried to disappear into his seat, and Mason Brooks slowly, deliberately caught Sarah's eye and winked. The message was clear. Game on. The Boeing 737-900 climbed through 15,000 feet, leaving Los Angeles behind in a sprawl of lights that looked like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Sarah Mitchell sat in perfect stillness, her body relaxed, but her mind running combat scenarios at the speed of thought. Mason Brooks hadn't moved from seat 1A, but she could feel his presence like a gravitational pull warping the space around him with lethal potential. Her father was handling the social crisis with his usual grace, turning Victoria Sterling's prejudice into a teaching moment about corporate responsibility and human dignity. The other passengers watched in fascination as a real-time transformation played out before them. But Sarah barely heard the words. Her entire focus was on the apex predator sitting 12 feet away reading Sky Mall magazine like he gave a damn about novelty pet accessories. Phoenix, we have additional intel. Elena's voice came through her earpiece. Apex International's contract specifies the elimination must look accidental. Brooks specializes in making murders appear like natural causes or unfortunate accidents. Whatever he's planning, it won't be obvious. Sarah processed this information while maintaining her cover of working on her laptop. She'd pulled up spreadsheets that looked like marketing data, but were actually displaying real-time biometric data from the sensors she'd planted on her father's clothing. Heart rate elevated but stable. Blood oxygen normal. Temperature 98.6 degrees. The numbers scrolled past in green, confirming he was still healthy, still alive, still unaware that death was sitting close enough to hear him breathe. Victoria Sterling's phone began buzzing incessantly as the plane reached cruising altitude and Wi-Fi activated. Sarah could see the woman's face cycling through shades of pale as she read message after message. Her daughter calling, her CEO demanding explanations, her entire professional life collapsing in real time as the video someone had secretly recorded went viral. In any other situation, Sarah might have felt sympathy, but right now, Victoria's meltdown was actually useful, providing chaos that might cover her movements when she needed to act. Mr. Mitchell, Maria Santos approached Darius with a tablet. I have the incident report ready for your review. As her father reviewed the documentation of Victoria's discriminatory behavior, Sarah noticed Brooks shift slightly in his seat. His hand moved to his carry-on bag, pulling out what looked like a prescription bottle. He shook out 2 pills and dry swallowed them with practiced ease. But Sarah's enhanced surveillance gear caught what others would miss. The pills weren't going down his throat. He was holding them under his tongue. Poison. It had to be. Something that would dissolve slowly, allowing him to transfer it through contact or contamination. Probably a synthetic compound that would mimic a heart attack or stroke. The perfect assassination tool for a crowded airplane where an obvious murder would be impossible to cover up. Sarah's mind raced through intervention scenarios. She could expose Brooks now, but without proof, she'd look paranoid. She could confront him privately, but that would blow her cover and potentially escalate the situation. Or she could watch, and be ready to counter whatever move he made. Phoenix package is moving, Elena warned. Darius had stood up addressing the cabin about his plans for Pacific Airways. Sarah watched Brooks track her father's movement with the patience of a sniper waiting for the perfect shot. When Darius moved toward the galley to speak privately with Maria, Brooks stood as well, stretching casually. Excuse me, Brooks said to the flight attendant named Kyle who was passing by. Where's the restroom? Just behind the galley, sir, Kyle responded, pointing toward where Darius had gone. Sarah was moving before Brooks took his second step. She intercepted him in the aisle with the kind of accidental collision that happened on planes all the time. Oh, I'm so sorry, she said, steadying herself against his arm. In the brief contact, she felt the corded muscle beneath his jersey, the readiness of a body trained for violence. But more importantly, she planted a micro-tracker on his sleeve, invisible to the naked eye, but transmitting his exact location to her phone. Brooks looked down at her, and for a moment their eyes locked. This close, she could see the scars on his neck from a knife fight, the slight discoloration in his left irises, from an old injury, the cold calculation of a man who'd killed more people than most soldiers had saluted. No problem, he said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl she knew was fake. Mason Brooks was from Boston originally. The accent was part of whatever cover identity he was using. Tight space is right. The tightest. Sarah agreed, not backing down from his gaze. Makes you wonder how anyone can move around without bumping into each other. His smile was sharp as a blade. Oh, I don't know. The right people always seem to find a way to get where they're going. The subtext was clear. I know who you are, you know who I am, and we both know this ends with one of us dead. Sarah returned his smile with one of her own, the kind she'd worn before clearing Taliban compounds room by room. Well, we'll see about that, won't we? She stepped it by letting him pass, but kept her body positioned to intervene if he moved toward the galley. Instead, Brooks actually went to the restroom, maintaining his cover. But Sarah knew it was just a delay tactic. He was waiting for the perfect moment. The plane encountered turbulence over the Rockies, the kind of bone-rattling drops that had passengers gripping armrests and praying to deities they normally ignored. Sarah rode it out with the easy balance of someone who'd fast-roped from helicopters in Afghan sandstorms. But she noticed Brooks emerge from the restroom during the worst of it, moving with unnatural grace through the bucking aircraft. Victoria Sterling was gripping her armrest with white knuckles, tears streaming down her face as she spoke on the phone with her daughter. Sarah caught fragments of the conversation. Something about a boyfriend named Marcus, about secrets and shame and the possibility of redemption. The woman who tried to have Darius removed from the plane was being systematically destroyed by her own prejudice going viral, and the poetic justice might have been satisfying if Sarah hadn't been focused on preventing an actual murder. Brooks returned to his seat, but not before brushing past Darius, who was making his way back to 2A. It was subtle, just fingertips against sleeve, but Sarah saw it through her tactical scope. Contact. Whatever Brooks had been holding in his mouth had just been transferred. Base Brooks made contact with package. Possible contamination. Need immediate biomedical advisory. Copy Phoenix. Analyzing now. What was the nature of contact? Dermal brush approximately 2 seconds upper right arm through clothing. Sarah watched her father's biometric data, waiting for any change. Heart rate still normal, temperature steady. But these new synthetic poisons could take hours to activate, designed to look like natural causes long after the killer was gone. Christopher Brennan had been on his phone dealing with his own crisis as his venture capital firm demanded explanations for his behavior. Sarah heard him promise to review their hiring practices, to examine their rejection patterns for bias. The revelation of Darius's identity had shaken him badly, forcing him to confront privileges he'd never questioned. But Sarah couldn't spare attention for his moral awakening. She had to figure out what Brooks had done and how to counter it. The elderly couple in row 3 had been watching everything with sharp intelligence. The man stood and approached Darius, introducing himself as Harold Johnson, retired federal judge. His wife Margaret followed, and Sarah's research subroutine immediately pulled their files. Civil rights activists, freedom riders, legitimate heroes who'd fought for justice when it could get you killed. Their presence here wasn't coincidence. They were the kind of people who gravitated toward conflict, who couldn't help but stand up when they saw wrong being done. As the Johnsons talked with Darius about joining his diversity board, Sarah noticed Brooks reaching into his bag again. This time he pulled out what looked like a diabetic testing kit. But Sarah's enhanced optics caught the truth. The lancet had been modified, the tip coated with something that gleamed unnaturally in the cabin light. Phoenix, we have analysis on potential toxins, Alona reported. Based on Brooks' known methods and available compounds, highest probability is synthetic batrachotoxin. Absorbed through skin causes cardiac arrest within 4 to 6 hours. Virtually undetectable in standard toxicology. 4 to 6 hours. They were 2 hours into a 5-hour flight. If Brooks had successfully dosed her father, he'd go into cardiac arrest somewhere over New York, and even immediate medical attention might not save him. Sarah stood moving toward the galley under the pretense of requesting water. She needed to get closer to her father to assess whether the contamination had actually occurred. But Brooks stood as well, this time heading directly for Darius. Mr. Mitchell, Brooks said, his fake southern drawl friendly and warm. I just wanted to say how much I admire what you're doing, standing up to discrimination, making real changes. My daddy would have been proud to see it. He extended his hand for a shake, the same hand that held the modified lancet. Sarah moved without thinking, her body reacting faster than conscious thought. She accidentally bumped into a passing flight attendant, sending a tray of drinks flying. The chaos created exactly the distraction she needed. Brooks had to step back to avoid the spill, his extended hand pulling back reflexively. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Sarah exclaimed, dropping to help clean up the mess. She positioned herself between Brooks and her father, using her body as a shield while maintaining her cover as a clumsy passenger. "No harm done," Maria Santos said, though her eyes were sharp with suspicion. A 20-year veteran didn't miss much, and Sarah had a feeling Maria knew something was off about the interaction. Brooks retreated to his seat, his expression neutral, but his jaw tight with frustration. Sarah had blocked him twice now. He knew she was protecting Darius, and she knew he knew. The dance was becoming more dangerous with each move. Her father was in conversation with Samantha Williams, the civil rights attorney in 3D, who'd been documenting everything. They were discussing the legal implications of the morning's events, unaware that the real threat wasn't discrimination, but assassination. Sarah heard Darius offer Samantha the position of Chief Diversity Officer, saw the woman's surprise and eventual acceptance. Her father was building his revolution even as death stalked him through the first-class cabin. "Package showing elevated heart rate," Elena warned. "Possible stress response or Phoenix, we're seeing irregular patterns." Sarah checked her phone, looking at the biometric data. Her father's heart rate had indeed increased, and there was a slight irregularity in the rhythm. It could be stress from the morning's confrontation, or it could be the first signs of the poison taking effect. She needed to get the antidote into him without revealing the threat. But first she had to confirm the poisoning had actually occurred. Sarah reached into her bag, pulling out what looked like a portable phone charger, but was actually a military-grade medical scanner. She needed to get within 3 feet of her father for it to work. "Dad?" she said loudly enough for others to hear, breaking her cover deliberately. "Dad, is that you?" Every head in first class turned. Darius looked up in genuine surprise to see his daughter walking toward him. "Sarah, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Washington." "Meeting got canceled," she said, embracing him. In the hug, she pressed the scanner against his back, letting it read his biological signatures. "I grabbed the last seat on this flight. Can you believe the coincidence?" Brooks was watching them with intense focus now. Sarah's reveal as Darius's daughter changed the entire dynamic. She wasn't just security, she was family. That made her both more dangerous and more vulnerable. "Everyone, this is my daughter Sarah," Darius announced with obvious pride. She just got back from her 4th tour in Afghanistan. Purple Heart recipient, youngest female Ranger School graduate in history. The cabin's attention shifted to her with new respect and curiosity. Victoria Sterling looked like she wanted to disappear into her seat. Christopher Brennan's expression mixed admiration with calculation. The Johnsons smiled warmly. And Mason Brooks. Brooks was already moving. "A genuine hero," he said, approaching with that false warmth. "Thank you for your service, ma'am. Mind if I shake your hand?" Sarah knew it was a trap. The lancet was still concealed in his palm, ready to strike. But refusing would be suspicious, and she needed to maintain the pretense a little longer. "Thank you," she said, taking his hand. The prick was barely perceptible, a mosquito bite of pain that most people would dismiss. But Sarah felt the lancet penetrate, felt the cold burn of something entering her bloodstream. Brooks had just poisoned her instead of her father. "Phoenix, your biometrics just spiked." Elena's voice was urgent in her ear. Sarah smiled at Brooks, not letting him see that she knew what he'd done. "That's quite a grip you've got there. Military bisto." "Something like that," Brooks replied, his eyes searching hers for signs of the poison's effect. But Sarah Mitchell had survived exposure to chemical weapons in Syria, had built up resistance to dozens of toxins through deliberate microdosing during her special operations training. Whatever Brooks had given her, her body was already fighting it. She had maybe 2 hours before it overwhelmed her system, but that was more than enough time. "Well, it was nice meeting you," she said pleasantly, then turned to her father. "Dad, we should talk. It's been too long." As she guided Darius back to his seat, Sarah's mind was already calculating. Brooks thought he'd neutralized her, which meant he'd make his move on Darius soon. She had to act first, but she also had to be smart about it. A fight in first class would endanger everyone, and Brooks was good enough that she wasn't sure she could take him cleanly, especially with poison in her system. "Sarah, what's really going on?" Darius asked quietly when they were seated. I know you too well. You didn't just happen to be on this flight. She glanced around, ensuring no one was listening, then leaned close. Dad, someone on the board leaked the acquisition. There's a contract on your life. The man who just shook my hand is a professional assassin. To his credit, Darius didn't panic or even visibly react. 40 years of business warfare had taught him to never show weakness. Mason Brooks, I know who he is. Sarah's surprise must have shown because her father smiled slightly. You think I'd buy an airline without doing my homework? I knew someone would try to stop me. I just didn't know when or how. And you still got on the plane. With my daughter secretly protecting me, seemed like good odds. He squeezed her hand. But now he's poisoned you instead. I can see it in your eyes, Sarah. The pupils are slightly dilated, and there's a tremor in your left hand. She looked down, surprised to see he was right. The poison was working faster than expected. I've got time, enough to stop him. Or, Darius said, his voice carrying that tone that had built a billion-dollar empire. We could work together. You forgot, sweetheart. Before I was CEO, I was a Marine. And Marines don't let their daughters fight alone. The plane banked slightly, beginning its route over the Midwest. Outside America, spread out like a patchwork quilt, unaware that 38,000 feet above a battle was about to begin that would determine not just the fate of two people, but the future of an entire airline's fight against discrimination. Victoria Sterling stood up suddenly, her face pale. Mr. Mitchell, I need to speak with you. It's urgent. Sarah tensed, ready to intervene, but Victoria's next words stopped her cold. I know who hired the assassin. It was my company. Nexus Pharmaceuticals has a subsidiary that would profit enormously if Pacific Airways fails. I just found the emails. They're planning to make it look like you had a heart attack brought on by the stress of the morning's confrontation. They're going to blame me for causing your death. The revelation hung in the air like another kind of poison. Victoria Sterling, the woman who tried to have Darius removed from the plane, was now potentially their only ally against a corporate conspiracy that went far deeper than any of them had imagined. Brooks stood up, apparently heading for the bathroom again, but Sarah saw his hand move to his ankle where the ceramic knife was concealed. He'd decided to abandon subtlety and go for the direct approach. Sarah stood as well, the poison making her slightly unsteady, but her determination iron solid. Mr. Brooks, I think we need to have a conversation. He turned, smiling that predator's smile. I think you're right, Ms. Mitchell. Why don't we step into the galley more private there? They moved together toward the small space, two trained killers about to engage in combat that would determine whether Darius Mitchell lived to reform Pacific Airways or became another casualty in the war against change. Behind them, Victoria Sterling was pulling out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I'm sending everything to the phone, she announced to anyone listening. Financial records, emails, the whole conspiracy. If I'm going down for discrimination, I'm taking the real criminals with me. The battle for Flight 892 was about to begin in earnest. The galley of Pacific Airways Flight 892 was a space designed for heating meals and storing service items, not for combat between two of the world's most lethal fighters. But as Sarah Mitchell faced Mason Brooks in that confined area, she knew it would serve as an arena where only one of them would walk out alive. Brooks moved first, the ceramic knife appearing in his hand with practiced ease. The blade was milk-white sharp as a surgical scalpel and completely invisible to metal detectors. He lunged with the speed that had made him Delta Force's most decorated close-quarters combat specialist before his discharge. Sarah's response was pure muscle memory, her body moving despite the poison coursing through her veins. She deflected the blade with her reinforced phone case, the ceramic scraping against military-grade polymer with a sound like fingernails on glass. Her counterstrike with the tactical pen caught Brooks in the shoulder, but his jersey absorbed most of the impact. They separated, circling in the tiny space. Through the galley curtains, Sarah could hear the normal sounds of the flight continuing, passengers talking, the hum of engines, her father's voice speaking urgently with Victoria Sterling about the conspiracy she'd uncovered. You're already dying, Brooks said conversationally, testing her with a feint to the left. That dose would drop a man twice your size in an hour. You've got, 30 minutes before your heart stops? Sarah felt the truth of his words in the increasing tremor in her hands, the way her peripheral vision was starting to blur. But she'd fought through worse. In Afghanistan, she'd continued fighting for 3 hours with shrapnel in her abdomen, earning her Purple Heart by refusing to leave her position until her squad was safe. 30 minutes is 29 more than I need, she replied, then exploded into motion. The next 60 seconds were a blur of violence contained in a space smaller than most bathrooms. Sarah used every surface as a weapon, slamming Brooks' head against the reinforced serving cart, driving her knee into his solar plexus when he tried to recover, barely avoiding the ceramic blade as it whispered past her throat. But the poison was taking its toll. Her reactions were slowing, her strength fading. Brooks sensed it like a shark smelling blood. His attacks became more aggressive, pressing her back against the emergency exit door. That's when Maria Santos appeared. The flight attendant moved with surprising grace for a civilian wielding a metal coffee pot like a club. It connected with Brooks' skull and with a sound like a bell being rung, sending him staggering. Maria's eyes were fierce with protective fury. "Nobody hurts passengers on my plane," she said, her 20 years of dealing with unruly travelers crystallizing into this moment of decisive action. Brooks recovered faster than any normal person should have, the knife spinning in his hand as he turned toward Maria. Sarah saw the trajectory, saw the death about to happen, and made a choice that her training said was suicidal, but her heart said was necessary. She threw herself between them, taking the ceramic blade in her shoulder instead of letting it find Maria's heart. The pain was electric, shooting down her arm and meeting the poison's burn in a symphony of agony. But it also gave her the opening she needed. Sarah's tactical pen found the pressure point in Brooks' neck with surgical precision. He dropped like his strings had been cut, the paralytic agent she'd loaded that morning finally serving its purpose. He'd be unconscious for hours and paralyzed for days, plenty of time for federal agents to take custody when they landed, if she lived that long. Sarah slumped against the galley wall, blood spreading across her navy blazer. The poison was accelerating her heart rhythm, becoming increasingly erratic. Maria was beside her, immediately pressing napkins against the wound. "We need to get you help," Maria said, but Sarah grabbed her wrist. "No, first we secure the plane." She pulled out her credentials, the ones that identified her as private security. "There might be others. We need to make sure my father is safe." But when they emerged from the galley, the first-class cabin had transformed into something unexpected. Victoria Sterling had her laptop open, connected to the plane's Wi-Fi, and was conducting an impromptu press conference via live stream. Her face was streaked with tears, but her voice was steady. "My name is Victoria Sterling, and by now you've all seen the video of my shameful behavior this morning. But that's not why I'm broadcasting. I'm here to expose a conspiracy that goes to the very heart of corporate America. Nexus Pharmaceuticals, the company I've worked for my entire career, hired an assassin to kill Darius Mitchell because his vision of equality threatens their profit model." She turned the laptop, showing documents on her screen. "These are internal emails discussing how minority-owned businesses threaten their monopoly. These are financial records showing payments to Apex International, a mercenary corporation. And this is a confession that my own prejudice was going to be used to cover up a murder." The live stream viewer count was climbing exponentially. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people watching in real time, and the corporate assassination plans were exposed at 38,000 feet. Christopher Brennan had his phone out, recording everything. "This is insane," he said, but not with fear, with the excitement of someone realizing they were witnessing history. "Victoria, send me those documents. My firm has connections with the Justice Department. We can have federal agents waiting when we land." The elderly Johnsons had moved to help Harold's legal mind, immediately recognizing the importance of preserving evidence. "Young lady," he said to Victoria, "what you're doing is brave. It's also dangerous. These people won't hesitate to silence you." "They already destroyed my life," Victoria replied, her transformation from prejudiced executive to whistleblower complete. "My daughter won't speak to me. My career is over. My reputation is destroyed. But maybe, just maybe, I can use my destruction to build something better." Darius had risen from his seat, taking in the scene. His daughter bleeding but victorious. The assassin unconscious. The woman who tried to have him removed now fighting to save his life. The entire first-class cabin united in exposing a conspiracy. "Sarah needs medical attention," he announced, his CEO voice cutting through the chaos. "Is there a doctor on board?" From business class, a young black woman stood up. "I'm Dr. Ashley Coleman, emergency medicine. What's the situation? As Dr. Coleman rushed forward, Sarah felt the poison reach a critical mass in her system. Her vision was tunneling, her heart feeling like it was being squeezed by an invisible fist. But through the growing darkness, she heard something that gave her hope. I have the antidote. The voice belonged to David Kim, the tech entrepreneur from Seat 3B. He held up a small silver case. I developed the antidote synthesis system for the military. It can create counteragents for most synthetic poisons. Brooks was sloppy. He used a variant of batrachotoxin. I can neutralize it. The next few minutes were controlled chaos. Dr. Coleman worked to stabilize Sarah while David Kim programmed his synthesis device. Victoria continued her live stream expos, now joined by Samantha Williams, who provided legal commentary on the crimes being revealed. Christopher Brennan coordinated with authorities on the ground. The Johnsons helped Maria Santos secure Brooks with zip ties from the emergency kit. Captain Williams's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're aware of the medical emergency in first class. We've been cleared for priority landing at Chicago O'Hare in approximately 20 minutes. Emergency services are standing by. But 20 minutes might be too long. Sarah's heart was stuttering each beat, a struggle against the poison trying to stop it. Dr. Coleman's face was grim as she monitored Sarah's pulse. She's going into cardiac arrest, the doctor announced. I need to start CPR. That's when Darius Mitchell did something that surprised everyone. He pulled out a small device from his pocket, something that looked like a modified insulin pen. I've been diabetic for 10 years, he said, kneeling beside his daughter. But this isn't insulin. It's an experimental treatment I've been funding, a universal antitoxin based on research from the Defense Department. It's never been tested on humans. Dad, no, Sarah whispered, understanding what he was about to do. It could kill me faster, or it could save you. He met her eyes and she saw the same determination that had built an empire, the same courage that had made him face discrimination head on. I didn't buy an airline to watch my daughter die protecting me. Trust me, sweetheart. Trust your old Marine father one more time. Sarah nodded and Darius injected the experimental compound into her neck directly into the carotid artery for fastest distribution. The effect was immediate and violent. Sarah's body convulsed her back, arching as the antitoxin went to war with the poison. Dr. Coleman held her down, monitoring her vital signs with professional intensity. Heart rate spiking, blood pressure dropping. Wait, the doctor's eyes widened. It's working. The arrhythmia is stabilizing. The entire first-class cabin held its breath as Sarah Mitchell fought for her life in the aisle of Flight 892. Victoria's live stream had now reached over 1 million viewers, all watching as a young war hero who'd survived Afghanistan nearly died protecting her father from corporate assassins. Then Sarah's eyes opened, clear and focused. Did we get him? The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Even Christopher Brennan, who'd started the flight as another privileged, prejudiced passenger, was wiping tears from his eyes. We got him. Darius confirmed, helping his daughter sit up. And thanks to Ms. Sterling's courage, we're about to get all of them. Victoria looked up from her laptop, her transformation complete. The FBI just responded. They have agents mobilizing to arrest the entire Nexus board of directors. The Justice Department is opening an investigation into Apex International. And she paused, reading a new message. The Senate Commerce Committee wants to hold hearings on corporate assassination attempts. Sarah struggled to her feet, Dr. Coleman supporting her. The knife wound in her shoulder was still bleeding, but the poison was neutralized. She'd survived again, adding another scar to her collection, another story to the legend that had started in Afghan mountains and continued in American skies. Mr. Brooks needs medical attention too, she said, looking at the unconscious assassin. He's paralyzed but not dead. He'll face justice for what he's done. Maria Santos shook her head in amazement. In 20 years of flying, I've never seen anything like this. A passenger defending the CEO, exposing corporate corruption, stopping an assassination, all at 38,000 feet. It's not over, Sarah said, her tactical mind still working. Nexus Pharmaceuticals won't give up easily. They have resources, connections, lawyers. This is just the beginning of the fight. Then we fight, Victoria said, closing her laptop and standing up. I've spent my entire career building networks, making connections, understanding how corporations work. I'll use every bit of that knowledge to help take them down. She looked at Darius. If you'll have me, Mr. Mitchell. I know I don't deserve forgiveness for how I treated you. You've earned something better than forgiveness, Darius interrupted. You've earned redemption. Pacific Airways is going to need someone who understands corporate warfare from the inside. Consider yourself hired as our chief ethics officer. The plane began its descent towards Chicago, the emergency landing that would make headlines around the world. But in first class, something more important than headlines was happening. Strangers who'd started the flight in conflict were ending it in alliance. Harold Johnson stood up, his judicial bearing commanding attention despite his age. What we've witnessed today is extraordinary. Not just the courage of individuals, but the power of transformation. Ms. Sterling began this flight as a perpetrator of discrimination and will leave it as a champion of justice. That's the American story at its best, the ability to change, to grow, to become better than we were. His wife Margaret added, but let's not forget the real hero here. Sarah Mitchell put her life on the line to protect not just her father, but all of us. She could have revealed the threat immediately, could have had Brooks arrested at the gate. Instead, she chose to let events unfold, to allow people to reveal their true character. And then she stopped a killer with her bare hands while dying from poison. Sarah, leaning against her father for support, managed a weak smile. I learned from the best. My mother always said that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. My father taught me that real strength isn't about winning fights, it's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. Today I just did what they raised me to do. The plane's wheels touched down at O'Hare with the gentleness of Captain Williams's expert hand. Through the windows, everyone could see the army of emergency vehicles, FBI cars, and news vans waiting for them. The story of Flight 892 had already become legend, spreading across social media faster than the plane itself had flown. As paramedics boarded to take Sarah and Brooks to the hospital, Darius Mitchell stood in the aisle of the plane he now owned and addressed not just the first-class cabin, but the entire aircraft. His voice carried through the plane's communication system, reaching every passenger. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened on this flight today, both the discrimination and the attempted assassination, represents everything wrong with our society. But what also happened, the courage, the transformation, the unity in the face of evil, represents everything we can become. Pacific Airways will be different from this day forward. Not because I decree it, but because all of you have shown that change is possible. He paused, looking at Victoria Sterling, who was gathering her things with a new purpose in her movements. We're going to implement zero-tolerance policies for discrimination. We're going to lead the industry in inclusion and equality. And we're going to do it not from corporate boardrooms, but from the front lines, from the seats and aisles, where real people face real prejudice every day. Christopher Brennan stood up. Mr. Mitchell, my firm would like to fund that initiative. We've been part of the problem for too long. It's time to be part of the solution. David Kim added, my company's anti-discrimination technology is yours free of charge. What we've seen today proves it's needed more than ever. Samantha Williams, the civil rights attorney, pulled out her phone. I'm calling my contacts at the ACLU and NAACP. This is bigger than one airline. This could transform the entire industry. As Sarah was wheeled past on a stretcher, she raised her good arm in a thumbs up. The poison was cleared from her system, the knife wound would heal, and she'd stopped an assassination at 38,000 feet. Not bad for a day's work. Victoria Sterling was the last to leave first class, stopping beside Darius. Your daughter saved my life too, you know. Not from Brooks, but from myself, from the person I'd become without realizing it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning the second chance you've given me. We all get second chances, Darius replied. The question is what we do with them. As they emerged from the plane into the chaos of cameras and questions, Sarah Mitchell was already planning her next move. The conspiracy went deeper than just Nexus Pharmaceuticals. Apex International had tentacles throughout corporate America. The fight for equality and justice that had begun with her father buying an airline had evolved into something much larger. From her stretcher, surrounded by paramedics and FBI agents, Sarah looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, other planes were flying, other passengers were facing discrimination, Other conspiracies were being plotted. But things had changed today. The world had watched a plane full of strangers become allies, had seen prejudice transform into justice, had witnessed what courage could accomplish even at 38,000 feet. 5 years later, the incident would be known as the Flight 892 Revolution. Pacific Airways would become the most successful airline in America, not despite its anti-discrimination policies, but because of them. Victoria Sterling would become a legendary ethics officer, her story of transformation inspiring countless others to confront their own biases. Christopher Brennan's venture capital firm would fund a generation of minority-owned businesses. The Johnsons would establish a foundation for equality in travel. And Mason Brooks would provide testimony that would bring down Apex International and send dozens of corporate conspirators to prison. But that was all in the future. In this moment, as Sarah Mitchell was loaded into an ambulance with her father holding her hand, she thought about her mother who'd died of cancer 3 years ago. Her mother who'd always believed that one person could change the world if they had enough courage. "We did it, Mom," Sarah whispered, though her only Darius heard. "We changed the world at 38,000 feet. The ambulance doors closed, carrying the wounded warrior who'd fought her greatest battle, not in Afghan mountains, but in American skies. Behind them, Flight 892 sat on the tarmac, its passengers disembarking into a world that had watched them make history. The plane itself seemed different somehow, transformed from a vehicle of transportation into a symbol of transformation. Captain Robert Williams performed his final walkthrough of the aircraft, stopping in first class where so much had happened. The blood had been cleaned up, the signs of struggle erased, but he could still feel the energy of what had occurred. He pulled out his phone and called his son at the Air Force Academy. "James, you're not going to believe what happened on my flight today. Remember Mr. Mitchell, the man who helped us when we needed it most? Well, his daughter just saved his life and exposed a corporate conspiracy at the same time. She's the kind of warrior you're training to become." He paused, listening to his son's excited questions. "No, she's going to be fine. She's the toughest person I've ever met, and I've flown with Navy SEALs. But here's what I want you to remember. Real courage isn't about fighting. It's about protecting people, standing up to injustice, and being willing to transform when you realize you've been wrong." That's what I saw today. That's what real heroes do. As news of Flight 892 spread, something unexpected happened. Other passengers on other flights began standing up to discrimination. Flight attendants began reporting more incidents, not because there were more happening, but because they felt empowered to act. Airlines that had ignored the issue for decades suddenly implemented training programs and accountability measures. The video of Victoria Sterling's confession and transformation became required viewing in corporate ethics classes. The image of Sarah Mitchell being wheeled out on a stretcher, still giving a thumbs up despite nearly dying, became an icon of courage. The story of how Darius Mitchell bought an airline to fight discrimination and ended up exposing a murder conspiracy became legend. But the real change happened in smaller moments. In the black teenager who boarded a first-class flight without fear. In the flight attendant who stood up to a discriminatory passenger. In the corporate executive who examined their own biases and chose to change. In the thousand small acts of courage that followed one extraordinary flight. Sarah Mitchell recovered fully from her injuries and returned to her position as head of security for Pacific Airways, though now her role was public. She implemented training programs for flight crews based on military close protection protocols. She established a rapid response team for discrimination incidents. And she continued to fly regularly and openly, making sure that no passenger ever felt unsafe or unwelcome on her watch. Mason Brooks, facing life in prison, made a deal with federal prosecutors. His testimony revealed a web of corporate assassination attempts that shocked the nation. Companies had been literally killing their competition, using mercenaries like Brooks to eliminate threats to their monopolies. The revelation led to the most comprehensive corporate reform legislation since the Great Depression. Victoria Sterling became an unlikely hero of the civil rights movement. Her public journey from prejudice to advocacy inspired millions. Her daughter Emma forgave her, and Marcus, the boyfriend she'd hidden, became her son-in-law. At their wedding, Victoria gave a toast that began, "I once tried to have a black man thrown off a plane. That man is here tonight, and he's the reason I learned to see people for who they really are not who my prejudice told me they were." Christopher Brennan's venture capital firm became the largest funder of minority-owned businesses in the country. His transformation from privileged ignorance to active ally became a case study in business schools. He often said that Flight 892 was where his real education began. The Johnsons, despite their age, traveled the country speaking about their experience on Flight 892. They connected it to their experiences in the civil rights movement, showing how the fight for equality was ongoing, evolving, but always requiring courage from ordinary people in extraordinary moments. Captain Robert Williams continued flying for Pacific Airways until retirement, always beginning his flights with what became known as the Flight 892 speech. Welcome aboard Pacific Airways, where every passenger is valued, every person is protected, and discrimination has no wings. We fly together or we don't fly at all. But it was Darius Mitchell who perhaps changed the most. The billionaire who'd bought an airline to fight discrimination became a champion for corporate accountability. He established the Mitchell Foundation for Corporate Ethics, funded with his personal fortune. He testified before Congress about the attempted assassination, using his platform to push for reforms that would prevent corporations from using violence to maintain power. And always, he spoke about his daughter, Sarah, the warrior who'd protected him not just from an assassin's blade, but from the more insidious poison of unchecked prejudice. The woman who'd shown that real strength wasn't about winning fights, but about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. On the 5th anniversary of Flight 892, Pacific Airways held a commemoration at LAX. All the passengers from that flight were invited. Victoria Sterling and Christopher Brennan came, now friends and business partners in their reform efforts. The Johnsons attended, still sharp and committed to justice despite their advancing age. Maria Santos was there, promoted to head of cabin crew training. Even Mason Brooks sent a letter from prison expressing genuine remorse and revealing one more conspiracy that led to additional arrests. Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium, her shoulder bearing a scar from Brooks's ceramic knife, her body still carrying traces of the poison that had nearly killed her. She looked out at the crowd, passengers, crew, reporters, activists, and ordinary people who'd been inspired by what happened at 38,000 feet. 5 years ago, she began, her voice strong and clear. A woman tried to have my father removed from a plane because of the color of his skin. A corporation tried to have him killed because of his vision for equality. Both failed not because of any superhuman heroics, but because ordinary people made extraordinary choices. Victoria Sterling chose confession over cover-up. Christopher Brennan chose growth over comfort. Maria Santos chose to fight beside me. My father chose to risk an experimental cure to save my life. She paused, looking at her father in the front row, his eyes bright with pride. But here's what I want you to remember. None of this had to happen. In a just world, my father would have boarded that plane, flown to New York, and conducted his business without anyone questioning his right to be there. In a decent society, corporations would compete through innovation, not assassination. In a moral universe, the color of someone's skin wouldn't determine the size of their struggle. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. We don't live in that world yet, but Flight 892 proved we can build it. One flight at a time, one passenger at a time, one choice at a time. Each of you has the power to be part of that transformation. You don't need to fight assassins or expose conspiracies. You just need to stand up when you see wrong being done. You need to examine your own biases and choose to change. You need to protect those who can't protect themselves. She raised her hand, showing the small tattoo she'd gotten on her wrist, 892, in simple numbers. This reminds me every day that change happens at 38,000 feet or at ground level. It happens in first class and in economy. It happens when we decide that discrimination is everyone's problem and justice is everyone's responsibility. The applause that followed shook the terminal, but Sarah wasn't finished. Pacific Airways is now the most successful airline in America. Not because we excluded discriminatory passengers, but because we included everyone else. We proved that diversity isn't just morally right, it's economically superior. We showed that when you treat every passenger with dignity, they become loyal customers. We demonstrated that when you stand for justice, justice stands for you. She looked directly at the cameras broadcasting the event live. To anyone watching who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong, know this: you have allies. You have warriors ready to fight for you. You have people who will transform themselves and their institutions to make space for you. Flight 892 was just the beginning. The revolution continues every day with every choice to be better than we were. As Sarah stepped down from the podium, her father embraced her, whispering, "Your mother would be so proud." "She is proud," Sarah replied. "I feel her every time someone stands up to discrimination. She's in every act of courage, every moment of transformation." The ceremony ended, but the movement continued. Flight 892 had become more than a historical incident. It had become a call to action, a proof of possibility, a reminder that change could happen anywhere, even in the unlikely arena of an airplane cabin crossing the country. As the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah Mitchell stood on the observation deck of LAX, watching planes take off and land. Each one carried hundreds of people, thousands of stories, millions of possibilities. And thanks to what happened on Flight 892, each passenger flew with a little more dignity, a little more protection, a little more hope. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elena Rodriguez. "Phoenix, we have a situation on Flight 447. Discrimination incident in progress. Local security requesting your expertise." Sarah smiled the warrior's smile that had preceded 100 victories. "On my way." Because the fight never really ended. It just moved to different altitudes, different flights, different battles. But Sarah Mitchell would always be ready, the Guardian at 38,000 feet, the warrior who'd learned that the most important battles weren't fought with weapons, but with courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to justice. As she headed toward her next mission, Sarah thought about all the flights happening around the world at that moment. Thousands of planes carrying millions of people across borders and oceans. And on each one, the possibility of transformation, the potential for ordinary people to become heroes, the chance for prejudice to become understanding. Flight 892 had proved it was possible. Now it was up to everyone else to prove it was sustainable. The revolution that began in the sky continued on the ground, one heart, one mind, one transformed life at a time. And Sarah Mitchell, warrior daughter, protector, and hero, would make sure it never stopped climbing.